I hope you like what you've gotten so far. One last point here then is transition from what we were talking about before the break about love, and then I'm going to answer a question I received during the break that'll be helpful, I think, for some of you because you may not have caught what I meant when I said it. Now, this is a sort of capstone insight from Love and Responsibility that John Paul II gives us. And this is probably where the title of his book came from, Love and Responsibility, right? He says the greater the feeling of responsibility for the person, the more true love there is. So the notion of responsibility for the other is key here for the Pope in regard to real love and discovering real love. Now, I bet you're here because you would really like to discover true love, right? And not just because you watched The Princess Bride. Okay? The true love that the church offers us is a love where you increase your desire to be responsible for the other. This is why fruitfulness in marriage, it's why we have so many children. Because every child is a tremendous gift. And the increased responsibility for my wife and I is discovered as a gift, as an amazing gift. Rather than as a burden, the world says the responsibility is a burden. How will you pay for all that college? I'm not paying for my kids' college. I work for the church. Give me a break, right? Okay. So the world gives us certain expectations with regard to marriage. I could go on and give a longer list of things that my wife and I could care less about, that the world thinks is really, really important. And some of my relatives think we're really strange. Right? Now, I'm not saying you can't discover this list or this gift of responsibility and love with fewer than 9 children. I'm not saying that, okay? You would be mistaken if that's what I was saying to you, if you thought that's what I was saying to you. But what I am saying to you is that's the dynamic, and that's how I've seen it lived out in my own life. It gets greater, right? If our love was on the decrease and the children were on the increase, we would have a big problem. Right? The beautiful thing, though, about this kind of love is that this love, the kind of math it does, is not subtraction. It's not division. Right? It's not, I can only love that child 1/9 as much as I could love when she was an only child. That's not how it works. It's the math of multiplication. Right? And the same is true simply between the spouses at the very beginning of a marriage. So if you're not discovering this increase of responsibility for the other, of a desire for responsibility for the other, then you're doing honorable courtship in the wrong fashion. You're not preparing for marriage. Do you see the insight that he has there? For you right now. This is the same kind of love and responsibility that you can see in care for the poor, in care for others, in care for the ignorant. Right? You know the people in City on a Hill who are really ignorant. I'm joking, right? That was a joke. You're supposed to laugh. Okay. Ooh. Tough crowd tonight. Okay. So the question related to some of these points I made about love was, what do I really mean when I say, or what does the church really mean when she says that we should have self-possession? So what is self-possession? The Christian understanding of self-possession is that unless we are self-possessed, meaning we are free from disordered desires and affections, we are free from, it's helpful to be free from sin as much as possible. Right? When we're free from bad habits, when we have emotional detachment, at least on a certain level, that makes us self-possessed, so that when we make decisions, we can make them as a free agent, as a free acting agent. At the beginning of this evening, I mentioned the demonic. Their one goal in their existence is to make you not free. That's their goal. That's how they can get you to hell. That's it. If you can never gain self-possession, you cannot say to God, I believe. You cannot choose martyrdom. It's not possible if you're not self-possessed. So this is a very positive understanding of self-possession. It's not self-possession as an end, as the point of it, self-possession for the sake of self-possession. It's self-possession so that you are free to make a choice. Okay? Is that helpful? Person who asked the question, yes? And to others, maybe, who also were wondering, I'm not quite sure what that meant. Okay. Let's go on. It's time for the cage match. Forgive me for the amusing image here. I figured, what the hey, I might as well do this, right? So this is cage match. We're going to put honorable courtship and dating for a few moments in the ring together, and we'll see who comes out alive, all right? It's going to get ugly. Here they are, compared 1-to-1, all right? You like this? Some people are still smiling. That's good. I got some mileage out of that one. Honorable courtship. We'll go through this list very briefly. Honorable courtship happens in the context of family and friends. Okay? It has a clear emphasis on discernment of marriage. If you're courting someone, it's because you think that you have a vocation to marriage, and you think the other person thinks they have vocation to marriage. If they're seriously unsure about that, you probably shouldn't be courting them, right? I saw this happen a lot in my wonderful dear alma mater. My wife has a counseling degree from Franciscan University, and she would work there in the counseling center as part of one of her practicums. And so she was working as a counselor on campus. And the victims of pre-theologians who are going to become seminarians, who can only date once, that's the policy, worst policy I ever heard of in my whole life. Not a criticism of the school necessarily, but so get this. You're a pre-theologian. Your plan is, I'm studying, or in early stages of studying to become a priest. I think I might be called to be a priest. So if I start dating a girl, meaning I go out with her more than once, then I have to drop out of the pre-theologian. So I can go out with her once and see if that's testing my vocation. And then if it doesn't work out, then I know I'm supposed to be a priest. Well, what happens to all the girls left on like the proverbial sidewalk? And these are like guys seeking holiness. They're like the nicest guys you ever want to meet, right? Okay. Don't court if the other person isn't actually down with courting, because it won't work, okay? Intimacy in courtship is tempered by patience, and real knowledge is gained. The argument I'm making for you tonight is that there's a world of difference between what happens typically in dating and what would happen in honorable courtship based on patience. You're waiting. You're really waiting. You're not just waiting sexually, you're not just practicing chastity externally, but you're also practicing interior chastity. This is a movement, inner movement of the heart. It's a self-mastery. It involves renunciation of self, dying to self. It involves martyrdom. And that patience, in every aspect, allows you to gain real knowledge of the other. So you actually get to know who this other person is in a deep and profound way. This is the love the Greeks described as philia, love. Real, true friendship, right? Extremely valuable, don't you think? Especially if you want to be free when you say, I do. Now often, they even wrote a song about this, often modern dating is just the two of us. Just the two. You've all heard that before, right? It's kind of old school, but, right? Think of the automobile date. Right? When I got my car, my first car, it was like a whole new world, right? I could go anywhere I wanted to go with anyone who would go with me. If only more people would be willing to go places with me in my car. Okay. But often modern dating is just the two of us, right? So it's not in the context then of family or friends, right? Danger, Will Robinson, danger. This is a big, risky place to go to. It's often expressed in short relationships. Not necessarily. Sometimes people go steady for a long time. They date for a long time, and then it doesn't work out. So they date someone else for a long time, it doesn't really work out. They date someone else for a long time. What does that look like? It looks like modern America, folks. It's called divorce and remarriage, and divorce and remarriage, and divorce and remarriage. My mom's okay with me talking about this in public because I've been teaching publicly for too long not to have it come up as part of a testimony, right? But I'm a child of divorce. My parents divorced, then later my mom remarried, then later my dad died, and then later my mom remarried again. When my mom became a Catholic after me in the year 2000, she had to go through the church's process to be free from those past mistakes called annulment. Right? So she'd become a Catholic and with all freedom say, I want what the church and what God wants for me. She became Catholic on those terms, on the church's terms, on God's terms. Right? My parents met at Berkeley in the 60s. My dad was the lead singer of a rock band. Do the math, folks. They learned divorce from the culture. My dad was raised Catholic. He married my mom outside the Catholic Church. Because he had given up on what the church had to offer him. He had. It's a sad truth. He came back into the arms of the church before his death, thanks be to God. Now my mom's Catholic. Everything works out okay in the end, right? Not always, but in this case, it seems like it's pretty darn sweet, in my opinion, right? From my own experience then, what I would say is that that's what this is. Now, did I learn from that mistake early on and get it all figured out and I did it all right? No. I wish I could have come to a class like this. Right? In modern dating, the notion of vocation is probably not very, very prominent. It might be something that's in the back of your mind as a Catholic, and you may have been doing dating for a while. But are you really serious about having made a vocational choice before you dated? Probably not. If you're going to engage in courtship in the future, you have to consider this question because, like I gave the illustration earlier from the school I went to, if you're still trying to figure out what your vocation is, you're doing a grave disservice to this other person when you're engaging in courtship with them. Because they really think that you're pretty sure that you're called to marriage. And what if you're not? What if you're not? That's a different class, by the way. Right? It's a different office. You gotta talk to Father Roach or Father Lockwood. Okay, guys? All right. Sister Connie for the ladies. And I can help you out with that. I know lots of religious. They're wonderful people. That's their vocation. Right? If it's not their vocation, they shouldn't be doing it. You need to figure that out before you engage in courtship. Finally, intimacy in the common dating relationship tends to develop too fast and to be false. You can get very long ways along in a relationship in this model, and at some point go, who is this person? I can't believe he just said that. I can't believe he treats his mother that way. I can't believe he's pro-choice. Right? All kinds of things that Catholics can face in this world become incredibly emotionally, maybe even physically intimate with this other person, and still actually really not know very much about the most important things about them. Does he pray? Does she pray? Really? Does she love children? I mean, does she really like children? Does she like the idea of being a mother? Because if she doesn't, she probably won't make a very good Catholic wife, actually. Right? A lot of people don't ever consider these things. Now, you could date and talk about important stuff, but you're probably going to be blinded to talking about some of the most important stuff if you become too intimate, emotionally or physically, right? Again, this is a tendency. These are generalizations, right? Not a condemnation, but an observation. You follow me so far? See, this is the cage. We're in the cage match. We're in the ring together. These are in the ring together. And I'm trying to explain in a kind of quasi-argumentative fashion that modern dating is a wimp compared to honorable courtship. Some guidelines for courtship. We're going to talk about what this looks like in flesh a lot next week. Right, Dave? Okay. So here's some guidelines. This is a phrase that could be easily misunderstood. Guard your heart. Practice chastity. Probably you understand what I mean when I say practice chastity, at least in the most generic sense. We'll look into more detail of that on week 3. You're going to love it. It's pretty amazing stuff. Again, you're all doing it very successfully at present. Right? In fact, I'm impressed. There's no immodest dress on the part of men or women that I can see tonight. Nobody set off an alarm whoa, I don't want to let my daughter near him, right? That kind of thing. I'm a dad, so I see that. So I think aluminum bat sometimes, I'm just saying. Okay. All right. Okay. Guard your heart. In courtship, you're going to guard your heart. Because if you become too emotionally attached to another person whom you're not married to yet, like I said earlier, it can make you blind to certain faults. And you have to be able to make a decision when you're doing this. I know a few people in this room's stories well enough to know that this is a difficult thing to navigate. I know it in this room. It's a difficult reality to deal with. Right? I've counseled so many people who have this very, very confused. They think guarding your heart means that you can't ever reveal who you are to other people, but that's exactly not what it means, right? You want to guard your heart because if you give away the part of yourself that's for marriage, emotionally and physically, before marriage, all you get is suffering and hurt. You're wounded by it. That's all you get. That's all that's in the cards. Even if there's some momentary, fleeting excitement, happiness according to the ways of the world, etc. None of it lasts, and eventually you look back on the situation and say, ouch, my heart is broken. You see? So guarding your heart means revealing your heart to someone who isn't going to break it. Do you see the difference? You need to know if you're called and ready for marriage. So you have to have done some serious prayerful discernment. Again, something I'm going to give you guidelines for in week 3. You have to know that you're called and be ready if he or she is ready. Right? So that this isn't something you start and then you get halfway through it and you go, I think I need another couple of years. I know it looks like we've kind of figured things out, but I just need some space. I'm just not ready yet. I need more time. Now, realistically, is that gonna happen? It can happen. I'm not saying this is like a rush thing. You start courtship and 6 months later you're married. That's not what I'm talking about. There's no schedule to this, right? But putting it off perpetually is a cultural phenomenon of our time. Before recent times, that simply didn't happen. Right? This putting it off perpetually. Now, there might be exceptions to that rule. I'll give my wife and I as an example, as a kind of an exception to this. I became Catholic in 1995. A couple months later, my wife graduated from college. That was Saturday. Sunday, we were engaged. And then Monday, she flew to Washington, D.C. and joined the Peace Corps. Now, this wasn't a surprise, oh, I just asked you to marry me. Why are you flying to D.C. and going away for 2.5 years? It wasn't a surprise. But I chose a long engagement, right? Because when I first met this girl, she said, I want to go into the Peace Corps when I finish college. Now, I was 19. So waiting a couple years was actually a really good thing. And it definitely tested our relationship, being on opposite sides of the planet. And she was in, former Soviet Republic with no phones that worked very well, at least. Sometimes you have radio in the background with Armenian music in the back. I can just picture the people waving their hands to this music. Anyway, it was a very unique situation. And it's not something I would wish upon anyone necessarily. But it was exactly what we needed in God's plan for us. So it's possible to have a long engagement and for that to be a very healthy thing. People in the military, sometimes it's better for them to get married sooner than later, but sometimes it's better for them to wait. Guess how we made this decision? It was all Eros, right? It was forced upon me. I just fell in love with her. I did anything she asked for. That's partly true. But what we really did was we went and we sought counsel from a wise priest, right? From a married couple that we knew, that we respected. And they said, they concurred with us and we found in prayer, this is what you're supposed to do. We weren't that clueless, right? We were keyed in enough to get that part right, to ask for good counsel. That's the next point. Find a mentor who can help you. Spiritual direction's a really great tool for this. Spiritual direction might not be something that everyone in this room needs to be having. This is meeting with a priest or someone else who's a mentor for you and divulging your deepest secrets to them about your prayer life, about your relationships, and then following in obedience their guidance. You have to trust them enough to follow their guidance, and it's hard to do sometimes. Okay? You also can simply have a good mentor, though. Guys, don't all call me up tomorrow and say, "Hey, dude, will you be my mentor?" Don't do that. I can't do that for everybody, right? I don't have that kind of time. I'm sorry. But there's other very holy, wonderful, knowledgeable men that you know in your life that you can entrust this kind of task to. And it's essential. I'm not saying I won't answer my phone or I'm gonna, you guys, some of you know me well enough, I'll talk to you, okay? But if all y'all call me, then it's a problem, right? Okay. Now, you have to really get to know the family. You have to spend time with them. This is not we've been dating for 6 weeks or we've been dating for 6 months. So now let's go meet the parents because we're thinking about marriage. Backwards. Way backward. That's the dating model, right? This is the classic. Yes, shake your head if you follow what I'm saying here, right? That's the classic dating. That's what's in our head. We'll get to know this person for a while, just the two of us. And then we'll meet the family. Then we'll really get to know some of the friends, later on. That's not necessarily the first most important thing. Sometimes we do that right. A lot of times we don't do that very well. Get to know the family. Let me give you an example of why. You might think my own personal story is the exception to the rule, but in all honesty, we just got this reality sooner than most people do. So, at some point in your marriage, it's extremely likely that unless you're a cold-hearted jerk who lives really far away from your in-laws, they're going to be part of your life at some point. When they get old, you'll be part of caring for them in some way. It's true. Just is. Sometimes it also, especially the economic times we live in, you're going to be out of a job, or you're going to be moving to a new situation, and you're going to live with your in-laws or your own parents, which might be even more awkward, out of necessity. For even a very short period of time, it can happen. So far, all of the above in my life, at least once, if not more than once. Now, my mom lives with us all the time, right? We are helping her because she has a disability, and she's helping us because we have a lot of kids. And farm animals. And 20 acres. Very glad to have my mom around. She's a gardener in the extraordinary fashion of how every mom should be a wonderful gardener. And she's doing a lot of our gardening. It's pretty awesome. But she actually lives with us. She pays mortgage with us, right? My mom pays me rent. Weird, huh? Okay. My in-laws also do the same thing. they bought into a little piece of Missouri with us when we bought our house. My mother-in-law leaves tomorrow. She's been with us for 6 weeks. My father-in-law couldn't come out because of health reasons and weather issues that he has related to the weather, but he'll be here again in March, April, depending on how the groundhog sees things in February, kind of thing, right? And they'll live with us. So it'll be, my dad's passed away, so he doesn't live with us. He's in heaven. He has the best house, right? But we have 3 parents that live with us. A lot of people this doesn't happen to until later in their life in our culture today. It's a great gift. Now, if I hated her parents, that would suck. Get to know the parents, folks. Right? I did. They're awesome. Right? I call my father-in-law Dad. And I'm cool with that. And I mean it. It's not just some kind of trite thing I say. Right? He actually goes by Papa. He's the Pope. Right? He's a Catholic father-in-law. Okay. But you get the point I'm making here? Like just not like, we'll just tolerate him at Thanksgiving. You might meet the most wonderful person in the world, but I would seriously regret it if they don't have family that's good. I would regret it in my own life if my wife's family was just sour. That would be lame. Now, it might be God's will for you to be part of someone's life, kind of like my own, where I came from a totally trashed family situation. My wife could have looked at the situation when we were thinking about marriage and said, that guy's got too much damage, I'm not going to go there. But she prayed about it, and she realized that God was going to work a healing in our circumstance, and he has. But that had to be clear enough for her to say yes to it. She had to be free enough to make that decision and make it with some knowledge. She had to get to know my mom. Right? Do you see how this works? It's really important, folks. I mean, ignore it at your own peril. Right? Maybe you've even seen this go really south with your own parents. Right? We come from families. Okay. Avoid excessive time spent alone. This might sound obvious after some of the other things I've said, but avoid spending excessive time alone and in situations of temptation. You have to establish boundaries and stick to them. Again, these will come up a bit next week in our discussion, and then I'll give you some even more clear boundaries in week 3. But I think you understand this idea that there need to be some boundaries that are established. We are not going to do X because we know that if we do X, it will lead to Y. Right? And then we'll no longer be engaging in honorable courtship. It will be dishonorable courtship, and we will be summarily dismissed by the military. No, I'm kidding. But the idea here is that if you don't set boundaries and you just kind of wing it, just like, we'll just do as we go along, we'll figure this out, then the odds are extremely high that you will not be able to engage in honorable courtship. It just won't happen for most of us. We're weak, we're wounded, right? And this isn't an act of fear, it's actually an act of trust. Trust in the other person and trust in God. Because the other way to live is really just wild abandon. It's really just, I guess, we won't ask permission. We'll just, we'll ask forgiveness. Yeah, that's what we'll do, right? It doesn't work out well. I want to share with you these 3 marks of martyrdom. I didn't steal these necessarily from anyone. I don't necessarily consider them to be terribly profound. But what I would like them to serve for you as is a kind of theological basis for courtship under the title of martyrdom. And I want to talk about three martyrs. They're all martyrs of blood, although one of them has a very special circumstance. She doesn't look like this. But this is a classic martyr. St. Lawrence. Y'all heard of him? If you went to KU, then you know probably who this guy is, right? St. Lawrence. He embodies this mark of martyrdom that we have to be joyful in our martyrdom. He famously said when they were roasting him alive on the rack, "Turn me over, I'm not on this side," right? Just before doing that, he gave away the riches of the church to the poor in Rome. He was a deacon. Excuse me. And when he was called before the council in Rome, they said, we want the church's riches. And he brought in the poor, and he said, these are our riches, right? He had a radical love, but he had this sense of humor that went, like, the thing that's going to cause him to get killed, he makes into a joke. A practical joke on the Romans, right? That's the kind of humor he exercised. And then as they're roasting him alive, he makes this statement, "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." Now, this is a martyrdom of blood. If you're engaging in courtship as martyrdom, right? You're sacrificing all for the sake of love of the other. Love of God and love of neighbor. And you exercise it with a sadness, a reluctance, this is such a bummer. Look at my friends over there who are still doing the dating thing. They look like they're having so much fun. Guess how those friends who are having so much fun see you? You're a boring Christian. Boring Christians are not convincing. You have to be joyful in this. You have to engage in it with joy. Because you're going to miss the point of it if you're not joyful about it, and if you can't make jokes with that woman about courtship. What I mean by this is, it's very healthy to be so joyful that you're willing to make jokes at your own expense when you're acting like a martyr. You have to have a certain amount of levity about this, okay? So I know this has been very serious, but it's a very serious evening. But when you're talking about this, when you're trying to live it out, you have to live it with a smile on your face, and you gotta laugh at each other. Sometimes you have to laugh at God too. He has a very good sense of humor, actually. Right? You know what I'm talking about. He has a very good sense of humor. Okay. The second saint I want to look at as a model, Saint Gianna Molla. She was a physician and a mother. You see in this first picture, she's with her husband Pietro. Look at them in this wonderful idyllic scene at a fountain in Italy. They're Italians. And then they're up in the Italian Alps here with some of their children. This is earlier in their life. And then this is actually her daughter, who looks a lot like her, doesn't she? This is Gianna, her daughter, that she died for. She was a physician, so she was very aware of her health condition that she developed during this pregnancy. And she had cancer that was going to cause her to get very, very sick during the pregnancy. And the side effect of the surgery to solve this cancer problem, ordinarily the side effect is that the pregnancy is lost. So the church would allow this, morally speaking, because the secondary effect of the surgery is the cause of the abortion. It's not an abortion. It might sound like a serious nuance, but that's the fact of it. She could have had this surgery in this circumstance, and it would have been morally allowed. However, she chose the path of martyrdom for the sake of her child, for the sake of her family. And she said, no, I'm not going to risk the almost certain loss of this child. I'm going to carry the pregnancy to term, and then we'll deal with the cancer. Now notice, this isn't just some person off the street who makes this decision. This is a physician, a very competent physician. The church considers her a martyr of love, and I would say that the mark that she displays very well is a certainty of purpose as a wife and mother. As a certainty of purpose as a Christian disciple. She was interested in loving as Jesus loves. And so when this opportunity was put in front of her, she was not obligated to make this choice, but she made this choice because she wanted the higher good. Her love had taken the supreme form of responsibility for the other, this unborn child whom she had never seen with her eyes. So a certainty of purpose is necessary. It's a mark of the martyr. And this is translating, again, not only to those who give their lives for Christ, but also for us as we live this white martyrdom that doesn't cost us our head exactly. Okay. Third one of my favorites. This is my boy. I made consecration to Mary using Maximilian Kolbe's model. I love Maximilian Kolbe. He is so awesome. I have to use him here because he is the perfect example of this, or one of them, right? Precisely because he was so devoted to Mary, he learned this obedience of yes to God's will, and he taught it to the brothers under his care. Can you imagine 600 Franciscans in one place at one time? The largest publication in Europe, and it's Mary's publication. It's totally about evangelization. So this is before World War II, largest publication of any newspaper in Europe, in the world, during its time. They did it with nothing. Everything came from God. Total trust in God. He models obedience. In fact, the way he taught it was he would do this with his brothers when they were coming early. They would come to join his group. They were either Franciscans from somewhere else or they were not yet religious and they were considering this vocation. And they would come and he would say, this life here is very, very simple. He would take the chalkboard, and on the chalkboard he would write, big V equals little v. This is the path to holiness, he would say. Voluntas, Latin for your volition, your will, right? The big V, God's will, needs to equal your will. This is how simple. This is the algebra of God's love, according to Maximilian Kolbe. It's the essence of Christian life. Now, if you bring this as a mark of martyrdom, obedience to God's will, and obedience to the other, maybe you never think of this, but I am obedient to my wife, and she is obedient to me. We're going to look at this according to the words of St. Paul in Ephesians chapter 5 in week 3. This is going to be exciting stuff in week 3. I'm making a lot of promises about week 3, aren't I? But I know it's in there. I know it's there. I can't wait to get there. The next couple weeks won't go by fast enough for me. I'm excited. Submission to the other. Putting yourself under the mission of the other. That's what this is. Obedience to what their needs are. Obedience to what your responsibility is to them. Right? This isn't, honey, go fold the laundry because I said so. That's not what we're talking about here. Okay? This is a profound love that goes way beyond something as trite as that. Okay? So he shows us then this third mark of obedience. His response when he wanted to step in the place of Francis. He's a Franciscan. The man that he died for, his name is Francis. So he stands in the place then and wants to take the place of this father who has children to care for if he can get out of the death camp of Auschwitz. And Kolbe has nothing to lose. He's lost everything at this point. He has nothing. He doesn't have his health. The monastery is destroyed. Most of the brothers are dead. He's given everything for God. He's given everything for the people in the camp. He celebrated clandestine masses and heard confessions through the night when he is dying and can barely breathe and hasn't eaten. He gave everything already. Here he steps forward and he says, I am a Catholic priest. That was his answer to them. Who are you? What's your name? I am a Catholic priest. That's his identity, right? That's the kind of obedience he had lived, all the way to that, where he'd been taken up completely by his vocation. I argue here, married people are called to this same level of obedience to God. The martyrdom that's lived in marriage looks like this. So courtship is a preparation for it. So there's going to be some level of this developing during courtship. You're taking on that vocation. I'm not kidding, I would die right now for any one of my children or my wife, period. I just would. I think most fathers would say that. That's what this means. I am a Catholic father. Right? Okay. Not to trump myself up, but I'm giving you a testimony. Okay, you're laughing at me, Julia. It's not helpful. It's okay. Now, martyrdom of blood might seem like a thing of the past, right? Maximilian Kolbe, that was during World War II. We don't have any Nazis anymore. What's the big deal? Well, you can look at the World Watch list and see that in 2013, Christian persecution was on the rise, not on the decline. Here they're highlighting countries where it's worse than other places. The really dark red stuff there. Hey, look where that is. I wonder. Christians are dying constantly. They're being persecuted constantly. Martyrdom is still the thing that's happening today in blood. But we're called, wherever we live, to live a white martyrdom, which is why I love this graphic. It's so useful for teaching this point. Because these folks are all dying martyrdoms of blood. They kind of have it easy. There's lots of opportunities for them. If you want to be a Catholic, a real Catholic in China, you mean it. There's nobody who's doing it in a halfway fashion at all. Right? In America, we can be pretty lazy. So what we're called to is a white martyrdom, the rest of the places in the world, right? And the churches always use this terminology to talk about dying for Christ and dying for others in the way that we live. This is what she means. If you live this joy, love, and obedience to the highest level, this is what a disciple looks like. This is, to kind of say it in shorthand, the basic requirements of a disciple of Jesus. We find it, for example, in all three of the synoptics, but it's especially clear here in Mark's gospel. If any man would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Notice that this does not just say, if any man would come after me. He means women too, right? The translation. Let him take up his cross and follow me. Or let him come to church on Sunday and hang out in City on a Hill. That's actually not the requirement of being a disciple. The requirement of being a disciple is denying yourself. This is this renunciation of self that leads you to freedom. It's a requirement. In fact, it has to happen for you to actually take up your cross in life. Otherwise, what does the cross look like? It's church's rules again. That guy, he's kind of crazy talking about dating being so difficult, and he's just, he's married. He doesn't have any idea what he's talking about. He's just too extreme. He works for that really reactionary bishop, Bishop Finn, and so he must be kind of strange. People could come up with lots of reasons why the things I may have said tonight could be rejected because they're ridiculous, right? The church shouldn't be asking for quite so much. But the church actually asks for this. Like I've shown tonight, honorable courtship is in the catechism. I'm not making it up. Now I'm going to deal finally here, briefly in these last moments we have. I want to exorcise a demon that prowls around seeking to destroy us. I don't mean to overly be freaky about demons or something, or even to be overly dramatic about this, but it's real and it's oppressive. So it is from the devil. We are taken by fear. The reading we looked at the very beginning of this evening from the first letter of John, he says that perfect love casts out fear, right? So that's going to be the answer to this problem. But these are some of the reasons in our culture. These are the names, so to speak, of these spirits of the sky who seek to make us afraid and to make us desire to use others. We live in a consumer culture. We're defined by what we can consume. Oh, television commercials. But even social media is captured for this purpose. Have you noticed that? Even someone in this room is trying to sell his book on social media for totally materialistic reasons. No, he's my good friend, right? But what a great way to use social media to sell things, but it's because we live in this consumer culture. This is what we do, right? You're wondering, why does that lead us to fear? I'll get to that in a moment. We live in a divorce culture. You just do. Did you ever growing up question the whole no-fault divorce thing? Did you know that that's like recent? Like, my parents lived in the time when that changed. My parents did. Before that, human history had no understanding of no-fault divorce whatsoever. And we're not just talking about Christians, we're talking about like culture in general. Every human culture thought that was weird. In fact, it didn't exist, so they didn't just think it was weird. They didn't even know it existed. No-fault divorce. And yet we take it as a given. If two people are unhappy, they should have the right to simply call it off. That's a modern invention. That culture has made us afraid, even if we think we personally have rejected divorce. Okay? This is something we have to contend with in the context of courtship. We also live in a throwaway culture. This is a phrase Pope Francis has been using recently. Our other popes have also used it recently. It's been a constant theme. A throwaway culture. This culture leads to things like abortion being normal. Dating is part of this culture. We're together for a few weeks and then, it just didn't work out. Whatever. It was fun while it lasted. That's a throwaway culture. It's even a throwaway culture in relationships. We also live in a pornified culture. Pornography has infected us to an extremely high degree today. In fact, even to the point where often we don't even recognize it for what it is. This is also an issue that has to be dealt with during courtship. If you have a problem with this, now is the time to deal with it. Marriage won't fix it for men or women. And women have problems with pornography as well. Often it looks different than it does for men, but sometimes it looks just like it looks for men these days. Recent studies are saying 30% of college women are watching porn regularly with their sex partner. Hardcore porn. 30%. College-age women. Yuck. It's on the increase tremendously. I hate to bring it up, but it's a demon that's in our culture, and it has to be faced head on. And there's lots of ways to get help and deal with this. I know personally because I've been through the struggle myself. The victory can be won. I'm not afraid to say it out loud. And I've seen countless men and women heal from this problem. It's a demon. It has to be gotten rid of. All of these lead us to be afraid. Could you imagine if you brought porn into a marriage? The kind of fear it causes? What if she finds out? What if he sees this conversation I've been having? What if? You live in fear. You're hiding from each other. You're living a double life. It's horrible. It's a horror. It's not joy. What if the divorce culture makes you so afraid to make commitment that in courtship you can't get to the place where you think you can say, I do? You have to ask for a healing from that fear. You have to pray about it. You have to get counsel about it. You have to do penance so that you can let go of your wounds, so they can be healed by Christ. You have to do these things. They're not optional. They must be done for the sake of your future. There's no fear in love, John tells us. Perfect love casts out fear. The fear of our culture has to be gotten rid of. Developing this perfect love requires honesty, purity, and trust, without exception. Trust is the answer. It is the thing that honorable courtship is about. It's about developing trust that can be carried into a marriage. It is the crisis of all those other things. All those other things cause fear on our part, and it makes it very difficult for people in our culture to trust. It makes it hard for us to trust God. Does he really forgive me? I bet I'm not the only one that at some point in my life that I've struggled with accepting God's mercy for my past. I bet other people in this room have also experienced that reality. But there's hope on the other side of it. The same is true in relationships. It is possible to grow in trust. Probably the reason you haven't discovered it yet, if you haven't, is because you haven't been doing it right. And if you keep doing it that other way, remember the cage match? It won't result in a growing trust, actually. And those demons will stick around, and they'll haunt you, and they'll weigh you down, and you won't be free in Christ. Let's pray right now together. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Sweet Jesus, thank you for this evening. Thank you for these beautiful truths. Thank you for coming to be with us, for dying for us, for showing us what love looks like from the inside of the life of the Holy Trinity. As God and man, you died for us, not only to redeem us, but also to reveal the Father's love and your love for the Father, to give us the gift of the Holy Spirit, so that we can learn this same love and live this same love. We ask tonight, as your children, for the special grace to accept these difficult truths, to be willing to give our lives for the sake of the kingdom, to hand over everything about ourselves, to hand over our emotional life, to hand over our work, our studies, to hand over our sexuality, our relationships, to give you everything, Lord. Give us this special grace, Lord, tonight. Give us a special grace in the coming weeks as we continue to consider these truths. Help us to remain faithful to a spirit of prayer and to truly be open to a new way of life. We call upon you now in prayer as we join together saying the prayer that Jesus taught us, a prayer of trust, a prayer of abandonment to the will of the Father, our Father. Lord of heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Holy Mary, our seat of wisdom, pray for us.